Good evening. My name is Angie Brenner. I'm the City Librarian for Mill Valley, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's First Friday presentation, The Story of Stuff. Thank you to the Mill Valley Library Foundation and the Friends for their generous and ongoing support of these programs. I'd like to introduce our speaker and topic by recounting a personal anecdote that might seem a little tangential to tonight's program, but bear with me. A number of weeks ago, I planted my first vegetable garden. Yep. I hauled the stones to make the borders of a raised bed, shoveled organic composted soil, and chose fledgling plants from nearby nurseries. I quickly became entranced with the process, developing an intimacy with plants whose every new blossom and growth spurt I cheered, whose every suspicious blemish I fretted over. But by harvesting those first vegetables and preparing a meal from them and recycling the small amount of organic waste, I completed a cycle that felt immensely satisfying. Next year, I hope to push out the literal and figurative borders of my garden. I'll start with seeds. I may use water from a spring in my own yard. And with each ensuing year, I hope to become more involved in this process, this cycle, and in doing so, move closer still to a complete connection to the origins of my food, where it comes from, who grows it, what chain of transactions are carried out in its production and distribution. In one sense, the story of a small vegetable garden isn't the same as the story of stuff, which depicts a linear and depressingly finite sequence of events, notable at times for its greed and destructiveness. But in another sense, these stories are identical in that they evoke a natural human instinct to be curious and to understand our surroundings and to feel invested in the consequences of our behavior. Examples of curiosity about journeys, processes, and cycles are suddenly popping up all around us, from the amusing junk food forensics of Steve Ettlinger's Twinkie Deconstructed, to the sobering tale told by recent First Friday speaker Lisa Marginelli of oil's journey to our local gas pump. We seem to be ready to acknowledge our complicity in a wasteful spiral of consumerism. In 2007, Annie Leonard made a 20-minute cartoon about trash that she hoped might reach 50,000. Over 15 million people have now viewed the video. Following tens of thousands of requests for more information and ways to get involved, Leonard created the Story of Stuff project. Subsequent videos following the same format have covered other stories, including cosmetics, bottled water, and even the broken economy of the United States. Allison Cook, tonight's speaker, is the project's longest-serving staff person. She is the director of special projects and designs the media, outreach, and advocacy strategies for all the movies. She is also, this is really important, a library enthusiast. I asked, and an avid bike rider. Please join me in welcoming Allison Cook.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And what she said was true. I am a library enthusiast. And part of why I feel that way is because libraries are an incredible example of how we can use things better. We can share. And it requires not only that we use fewer resources, but also that we can arm ourselves with the information and knowledge to be more effective change agents. And also, so it provides a space for us to come together as a community and learn and share and enjoy each other's company. And so oftentimes, so let's hear it for libraries. And so people are always asking me, what's an example of these kinds of solutions that you're talking about? Like a library is a really great example of the kinds of solutions that we're talking about. And so as has already been mentioned, my name's Allison Cook, and I work with an organization based in Berkeley, California, called the Story of Stuff Project. And so I thought that tonight I would share a little bit with you about some of our thinking at the Story of Stuff, some of what we are really excited about, some of the things that are really stressing us out, and then we could kind of open it up for a little bit of discussion. But before I got started, I actually wanted to tell you guys a little bit about me. So I'm from Los Angeles. And so today I was at training for online organizers run by some of the folks at Move On, the new Organizing Institute, a bunch of people who are doing incredible work in terms of really pioneering this online space. And kind of they were asking you to go around and talk about kind of what kind of work you do. And I was like, I'm an environmentalist, and I'm an environmentalist from LA. And so I think that it's important for me to just explain that part of why I'm so excited about the work that I do at the Story of Stuff is that I wouldn't have said originally, I am an environmentalist, but using this lens of stuff and the way that we relate to our computers, our podiums, our cell phones, our clothing has really helped me personally see the way in which all of these things are fundamentally connected. And I am really excited about the way in which they're connected because it then means that everything that we're working on is connected and we can feel all the more powerful and energized and excited by the work that we do. And so now that you know a little bit about me and how I came to this work, I wanted to just share a little bit about what we do at the Story of Stuff. So can I just get a sense of how many people in the room have seen the Story of Stuff? Okay, so for those of you who haven't seen this, it's like a considerable percentage. But for those of you who haven't seen the Story of Stuff, we make short format online movies about different sustainability and justice issues. And so the first movie is it's a 20-minute film which you can watch for free online at thestoryofstuff.org. All of our movies and all of our resources are available for free to download for use in schools, libraries, and whatever environment. We feel a deep commitment to that work. But basically, the Story of Stuff is the product of Annie Leonard's 25 years experience traveling the globe, looking at the places where our stuff is made and the dumps where it is dumped. She worked for many years with Greenpeace as a waste trade activist, kind of a toxics and waste trade activist. So in the United States, we have and have had a kind of nasty habit of exporting our toxic waste overseas. And so Annie's job with Greenpeace was to go to Bangladesh and be like, hey guys, I just wanted to give you a heads up that the United States is about to bring this huge ocean liner of toxic trash to your community. Let's organize and make them go elsewhere. And so that's how she kind of developed over kind of 25 years, honestly, a very robust analysis of where stuff comes from, how it's made, and the social and environmental impacts along the way. So the Story of Stuff is a 20-minute cartoon that in charming black and white stick figure basically tells you the entire materials economy. And so that's kind of to give you a sense of where we're coming from and what we're talking about. And as has already been mentioned, we never intended it for it to turn into an organization. We thought that when Annie and I made this first movie in 2007, the idea was we'd get 50,000 people to see it, total success, and we'd be done. But what was clear was that there was by the 15 million people who have now seen the movie, is that there was a real desire and hunger to have this conversation. And that in ways that we hadn't necessarily anticipated, there was a whole community of people who were ready and wanting to talk about these things, and not just talk about them, to actually do something. And so we felt a real responsibility as people committed to doing everything we gosh darn can to make the world a better place, to kind of take advantage of that moment and create an organization to extend the story and talk about different issues. So we've talked about bottled water, electronics, shampoos and conditioners, and all of the toxins environmental destruction processes they're in. And so that's a little bit about the work that we do at the Story of Stuff. And so kind of to give you guys a little bit of our thinking at the Story of Stuff, this is oftentimes a graph that we use when talking about our work. And we actually just call it the graph of bad things, because no matter what you're talking about, whether you are talking about kind of environmental crises, whether it's kind of plastics in the ocean, increasing rates of cancer, increasing rates of diabetes, the number of Americans who are in jail in the United States, this is pretty much the graph that you need. It just looks like this. And that's actually one of the things that is extraordinarily depressing, but I would also say extraordinarily exciting. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you the three things that I'm going to talk about tonight. And so the first is that our relationship with stuff is really messed up. And that is very much connected to the environmental, the economic, and the social problems that we face. The second thing that I'm going to talk about is that as convenient as it would be, we cannot shop our way out of this problem. And you laugh, but I think that increasingly in the environmental community, we have kind of convinced ourselves, or rather been hoodwinked, into believing that if we buy this product instead of that product, that we will have done our part. And so the third point that I want to make, besides kind of bummer point number one and bummer point number two, is that actually I think that this is a very exciting moment that we find ourselves in. And I am a 26-year-old who loves my job and is really excited about the work that we're going to do together going forward. And so to bring us back to bummer point number one, our relationship with stuff is really messed up, right? And so the way that we talk about this at the Story of Stuff kind of, it works in three ways. And so we say we're using too much stuff, we're using too toxic stuff, and we're not sharing it well. And so I don't know, for those of you who have watched the Story of Stuff, a little bit of this will be old news. But if you kind of, there's a raging debate among ecological economists and kind of people working in global footprint kind of calculators and things like that, about if everyone were to live and to consume in the way that we do in the United States, it would require 3 to 5 planets. So there's this big debate about whether it's 3 planets, whether it's 4 planets, whether it's 5 planets. And it's kind of like, hold on guys, I am not very good at math. And I know that we only have one. And so part of what we're talking about is drastically changing the way that we make, use, and throw away stuff, not just because it would be nice, but because it's going to be what enables us to continue to exist on planet Earth. And so this is an extraordinarily important issue, and one that I feel very passionate about, and one that also we have got to figure out. But one of the great things about our kind of fundamentally messed up relationship with stuff is that if you're looking at our really unsustainable materials economy, that it encompasses so much. So whether you care about food justice issues, whether you care about transportation, whether you care about education, whatever it is that gets you excited, there is critical work that you can be doing, that many of you already are doing. And so kind of Annie likes to joke that one of the great things about such an all-pervasive problem is that you don't even have to do something boring. You know, kind of like whatever it is that gets you excited, we need you in this work. And so kind of so as I was saying, we use too much stuff, we use too toxic stuff, and we're not sharing it well. And so kind of one of the ways in which we have gotten really off track is our relationship to shopping. And so I am from LA, and so I enjoy shopping. And I don't want to guilt anyone about shopping. It's important to, wear clothes before, during, and after the revolution, right? But I was recently, so as was mentioned, I'm a cyclist, right? So I bike to and from work. I bike from my apartment in Oakland to our office in Berkeley every day. And it was recently the last day of school in the Oakland School District. And I was like, biking to work, la la la, this is me biking. And there was a young man who I would say probably like 15 or 16 years old. And he was wearing his like fancy end of school year clothes. And he was carrying in his hand his sneakers. He was walking down the streets of Oakland in his stocking feet, carrying his sneakers in his hands. I can only assume because he did not want to arrive at his school party with his sneakers scuffed. And that says to me, on some level, that our relationship to stuff is totally distorted, right? Shoes are for your feet. You can have good-looking shoes, of course, but you want them to be able to serve you in getting from point A to point B. It's very useful. And so kind of in this kind of conflation of shopping and the stuff that we have in our lives relating to how we identify in the world, we've gotten really off track, so that we have teenagers in Oakland walking with their sneakers in their hands. That we have people who are more obsessed with brands than they are about the well-being of their neighbors. And so our relationship with stuff is also super toxic. And we have made a number of movies that have addressed this issue. Whether we're talking about kind of the heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants that are in our electronics, whether we're talking about the known carcinogens that are in our shampoos. I don't know if any of you are aware of this. To take the example from the story of cosmetics, the personal care products that we use, so personal care products is kind of the unfortunate umbrella term for like shampoos, soaps, deodorants, and all of those kinds of things, right? And the personal care products that we use aren't regulated by anybody in the United States. They're kind of pseudo-regulated by an industry department that actually just says everything's totally fine. And that they've recently, the Environmental Working Group and a number of really great organizations have recently done a number of studies that have revealed lead in lipstick, that have showed that there are known carcinogens in baby shampoo. And so when we're talking about the things that we're putting on our bodies, in our lives on a day-to-day basis, and that you can't wash your hair without, concerns that you're exposing yourself to heavy metals or carcinogens, we are on the wrong path at that point. And I think that this is also one of those examples where if you can look to what is being done better elsewhere. So in the European Union, they have a much more aggressive approach to chemicals policy. I would also argue that that also has to do with the fact that they have universal health care. So it is in their best interest to keep their citizens healthy. But they have all sorts of kind of overarching legislation that says, we're just not going to put these toxins in our products until we can prove that they're safe. Whereas in the United States, the burden of proof is on us, and we have to prove that these chemicals are causing us cancer, are causing birth defects, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have too much stuff, too toxic stuff, and we're not sharing it well. And so I apologize, this graph is a little bit out of date, but I think that it kind of more or less communicates the idea. So the 20 richest percent of the world's inhabitants consume 76.6% of the resources, while the poorest 20% consume 1.5% of our resources. So I would argue, and I think that the numbers would support me, that the way that we're consuming is not only not making us happy, but it's just not very fair. There's a really great organization called the Happy Planet Index, and they do, the organization is called the New Economics Foundation, but they put out this report every year called the Happy Planet Index, Because it turns out actually that this unequal distribution of consumption, this unequal distribution of resources is actually, on some level, the science would suggest is actually contributing to a level of dissatisfaction. And that there's an excellent book just put out in the UK called The Spirit Level, which actually talks about how inequality can lead to depression in communities. And so the Happy Planet Index, they actually do this analysis to look at kind of unit of resource consumed and how that translates to general well-being in a community. And so they do this internationally. And I've got to tell you, the United States is not doing very well. That Costa Rica is the country that is winning. I mean, it's certainly not doing perfectly, but in terms of the way in which they consume and how that turns into a general sense of well-being in their community, they're actually doing much better than we are. I believe with the exception of Luxembourg, the only countries that were doing better than the United States are in sub-Saharan Africa. So our dysfunctional relationship to stuff is also very much connected to these emotional, psychological, and social challenges that we face. On some level, I think that you could make the argument that if we were destroying the planet, but we were having a really great time, like, let's just go ahead and extend the party. But we're destroying the planet, and everybody's freaking miserable. And so I would argue that this kind of necessitates that we investigate this a little bit more closely. And so this kind of actually brings me to my second point, which is that we cannot shop our way out of the problem. And so in my kind of slapdash haphazard way, I've kind of explained that there are many problems that we face. Too much stuff, too toxic stuff, we're not sharing it well, we're not as happy as we could be, all of these kinds of things. And I think that we can kind of acknowledge that, particularly in the environmental community, in progressive communities, I think that there's a real understanding of bummer point number one, right? That we have a problem with stuff. You don't have to belabor that point. All you have to look at is the kind of expansion of storage space across the United States to understand that, like, we are not doing this very well. But I think that then the question becomes, what do you do about it? We understand that we are facing kind of huge ecological, economic, and kind of social challenges in the 21st century. So then, what do you do? And I think that's an excellent question. And I think that one of the challenges is that oftentimes what we are told to do is to shop. That kind of when we were facing a national crisis such as 9/11, George Bush told us to take to the mall. It is your American duty. And when we are trying to figure out how do we address the huge ecological challenges that face us, like climate change, that is a big deal. And so how do you intervene in something like that? And all too often we are told, bring your cloth bag to the grocery store. Buy this refillable water bottle. And those are all good and important things to do, and I do them. But I do them not because I think that that is what is going to tip the scales, but I do them because it makes me feel good. And when I feel good, it's a lot easier for me to do the things like kind of try and figure out how to have a conversation about fundamentally changing our relationship to the materials economy. And not only does it make me feel good, but it also sends a message to other people in my community about what's important to me and what I value. And then I don't have to feel like such a hypocrite. And so that's useful too. And so I'm not saying that those things aren't useful. I'm just saying that kind of buying organic is excellent, and I buy organic and I frequent my farmers markets, and it's really important to do. But it's not the same as mandating that all of our genetically modified food is labeled in the grocery store. And so kind of one of the ways in which you can see this really play out is in the plastic bag debate. And Marin County has done some excellent work on this, for which I commend you. But that kind of instead of just saying, in all too many communities, instead of just saying, no plastic bags, the conversation is bring your reusable bag to the grocery store. Buy another hip kind of reusable bag. That's how we're going to solve this problem. And I think that there's an increasing understanding that that's not working. That there's a real kind of defeatist attitude, like why bother? And it's really quite interesting to me in the work that I do, the number of people that I interact with who feel like there's nothing to do. And that for me is super sad, because there's so much to do. And I think that we have forgotten on some level the incredible power and potential that we have. And I think in part that's because the way in which nonprofits are structured, we think that organizing is a professional job. I think that sometimes it's because we have clicked too many petitions and seen too little done. I think sometimes it's because all that organizations are asking us to do is to pledge to ride our bike to work one day out of the year. And so I think we're really at a time where we have to be a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder about what we're asking of ourselves and what we're asking of each other. And so I actually wanted to share with you guys a little bit of analysis that we've done at the Story of Stuff. Is kind of, we talk about kind of, we imagine that we all have two selves, right? Our citizen self and our consumer self. You can also think of them as muscles. And our consumer muscle is stroked and nurtured and validated from the moment that we exit the womb. I am a very good shopper. But our citizen muscle has totally atrophied. And this is not true across the board, but in general, people's sense of how to engage in their community, how to advocate for a stoplight, how to feel like they're affecting legislation, how to do something as critical as run for office, has totally atrophied. And so we've been having this conversation at the Story of Stuff and really trying to think about how do we remind people about how powerful they are. And so I actually wanted to take a second, we kind of in this question of struggling with this, we have made a movie, and it's called The Story of Change, and it will be coming out on Tuesday, July 17th. And so I thought that I would show you guys the teaser for the movie. Uh-oh. All right, new plan. I'm gonna make all my comments, then we're just gonna watch the rough cut, and you guys are gonna research the teaser on your own. All right. So, like I was saying, consumer muscle, citizen muscle. We have to figure out a way to bolster our citizen muscle. And we have forgotten how to do that. And so this is actually the point that actually gets me most excited, is that I think that this is an incredibly exciting moment. I give a lot of talks, this is my first talk at a library, but I actually give a lot of talk to college students. And I technically qualify as a millennial. And one of the things that I say to the college students that I work with and that I talk with is, what a great mission to be charged with. To get to be the architects of how we redesign, how we do almost everything. We have to rethink the way that we approach public transportation. We have to rethink the way that we approach housing design. We have to reapproach the way that we think about education and food systems and all of these kinds of things. What an incredible terrain to forge. And what incredible tools that we have. We have the internet. Do you know how cool the internet is? It is, the work that I do would be fundamentally different without the internet. There is, like, our movie is really good. I will tell you, our movie is really good, but there's no way we would have reached 15 million people with this message without the internet. Our movies have been translated into over, at this point, 50 languages, because we are able to correspond with people on every single continent and territory that is recognized by Google. And that there is incredible power and potential here. And I'm not saying that the internet will solve our problems. That is certainly not what I'm saying. There are many challenges that come along with the advent of the internet age. Whether you want to talk about social isolation or the energy impact of internet connections or any of those things. But what I'm saying is an incredible tool that we have at our disposal. And another incredible tool that we have at our disposal that we seem to have forgotten about is history. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Van Jones's work. He's a really incredible green jobs activist, Oakland local, who does some really great work. And he has this rap that he's been doing recently about progressives and talking about how progressives are kind of like your friend with a really bad self-esteem problem. That it's like they've forgotten all of the really incredible things that they've done. And I think that as a progressive community, as an environmentalist, as someone who is trying to forge really big changes, I think that our community, and I would count you among them, has forgotten about all the really cool things that we've done, like the Clean Air Act, like the Clean Water Act, like all of, say what you will about the Equal Rights Amendment, but there's been some real kind of advances in terms of the way in which gender equality works in the United States. There are big, bold things that have been done. I was recently at a museum exhibit at the Oakland Art Museum, and they have an exhibit that I would highly recommend on the year 1968. And for me, it was really cool. I'm sure that for those of you who were there, it was really cool. But to be in an exhibit like that that's basically going through month by month of the entire year, and like, oh, this is the first picture of the planet Earth. Like, what? I can't even conceive of that. And so I would say that we have to remember all of the incredible things that we've done that have gotten us to where we are, because that's part of how we're going to remember all of the incredible lessons that we need to take with us going forward. And so when we talk about kind of exercising that citizen muscle, we're not just talking about this kind of like good Boy Scout kind of thing. And I love Boy Scouts. It's about how you show up in your community. It's about how you participate. And that has to do fundamentally with what kind of person you are and what kind of things you like to do. And so this is where I'm going to take a break and show you guys the story of change. And so this is our newest movie, and it's basically about 5 minutes, so we'll just go ahead and exit this. And I think this will bring a lot of these things together.
In season 1 of The Story of Stuff, we looked at a system that creates way too much stuff and way too little of what we really want. Now we're going to start looking at the stories behind the story of stuff. That's where we'll find ways to turn this situation around. Welcome to season 2. Ever since I learned where our stuff really comes from and how this system is trashing people and the planet, I've been trying to figure out how we can change it. I've read a lot of these. 100 ways to save the planet without leaving your house. 50 simple things you can do to save the Earth. The Little Green Book of Shopping. I thought these might have the answers, but their tips all start here, with buying better stuff. And they all end here, with recycling all that stuff when I'm done with it. But when it comes to making change, this story of going green, even though we see it everywhere, has some serious shortcomings. It says that if I become a smarter shopper and tell all my friends to do the same, I've done my part. And if I don't buy all this green stuff, then it's my fault the planet's being destroyed. Wait a minute, my fault? I didn't choose to put toxic products on the shelves or allow slave labor in factories around the world. I didn't choose to fill stores with electronics that can't be repaired and have to be thrown away. I didn't choose a world in which some people can afford to live green, leaving the rest of us to be irresponsible planet wreckers. Of course, when we do shop, we should buy the least toxic and most fair products we can. But it's not bad shoppers here who are the source of the problem. It's bad policies and bad business practices here. And that's why the solutions we really need are not for sale at the supermarket. If we actually want to change the world, we can't talk only about consumers voting with our dollars. Real change happens when citizens come together to demand rules that work. Look, it is important to try to live green. As Gandhi said, be the change. Living our values in small ways shows ourselves and others that we care. So it is a great place to start. But it is a terrible place to stop. After all, would we even know who Gandhi was if he just sewed his own clothes and then sat back waiting for the British to leave India? So how do we make big change? To answer that question, I went back and looked at Gandhi, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the US civil rights movement, and the environmental victories here in the 1970s. They didn't just nag people to perfect their day-to-day choices, they changed the rules of the game. It turns out there are 3 things you find whenever people get together and actually change the world. First, they share a big idea for how things could be better. Not just a little better for a few people, a whole lot better for everyone. And they don't just tinker around the edges. They go right to the heart of the problem, even when it means changing systems that don't want to be changed. And that can be scary. Hey, millions of us already share a big idea for how things can be better. Instead of this dinosaur economy that focuses only on corporate profits, we want a new economy that puts safe products, happy people, and a healthy planet first. Duh! Isn't that what an economy should be for? Trying to live eco-perfectly in today's system is like trying to swim upstream when the current is pushing us all the other way. But by changing what our economy prioritizes, we can change that current so that the right thing becomes the easiest thing to do. Second, the millions of ordinary people who made these extraordinary changes didn't try to do it alone. They didn't just say, I will be more responsible. They said, we will work together until the problem is solved. Today, it's easier than ever to work together. Can you imagine how hard it was to get a message across India in 1930? We can do it now in less than a second. Finally, these movements succeeded in creating change because they took their big idea and their commitment to work together, and then they took action. Did you know that when Martin Luther King Jr. organized his March on Washington, less than a quarter of Americans supported him? But that was enough to make change because those supporters took action. They did stuff. Today, 74% of Americans support tougher laws on toxic chemicals. 83% want clean energy laws. 85% think corporations should have less influence in government. We've got the big idea and the commitment. We just haven't turned it all into massive action yet. And this is our only missing piece. So let's do it. Making real change takes all kinds of citizens, not just protesters. When you realize what you're good at and what you like to do, plugging in doesn't seem so hard. Whatever you have to offer, a better future needs it. So ask yourself, what kind of change maker am I? We need investigators, communicators, builders, resistors, nurturers, and networkers. At storyofstuff.org, you can explore these types of change makers and find your first or your next step to take action. Being a responsible citizen starts with voting. That's one of those basic things that everyone's just got to do. But it gets way more exciting and fun when we put our unique skills and interests to work alongside thousands of others. I know that changing a whole economic system is a huge challenge. It's not easy to see a clear path from where we are today to where we need to go. And there's no 10 simple things we can do without leaving our couches. But the path didn't start out clear to all these guys either. Dr. King said, faith is taking the first step even though you don't see the whole staircase. So they worked hard to get organized, practiced the small acts that built their citizen muscles, and kept their focus on their big idea. And when the time was right, they were ready. It's time for us to get ready too. Ready to make change and write the next chapter in the story of stuff.
Basically, we are super excited to be launching this movie because we feel like it's a critical story that people really need to hear right now. And they need to be reminded of how powerful they are and how fantastic they are and how much we need them and how much we need you to build the kind of better future that I think we can all agree that we want. And so without further ado, I wanted to open it up for questions. Yes? You can have the first question.
I'm going to stand up. This is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, we all know we have to lower our footprint. And secondly, it is very paradoxical that in the present campaign, President Obama is searching for a solution. How is it possible to raise our standard of living, the middle class, without consumption? That's a real profound question that we all have to face.
And
I
would agree.
That is the ultimate dilemma that we face in our society. We have exported our consumption all over the world. Now it's taken hold in China, India, places that I left here. But yet, we don't seem to understand the basic principle of stuff. The paradox is, how do we raise all of our well-being and at the same time stop producing? That's my question.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
I wouldn't say that I have the answer,
You don't have.
but I have some ideas.
Okay.
And I think that one of the ideas is actually we need to think a little bit bigger about how we're going to intervene. I don't know if anybody recently was following that New York Times op-ed about busyness, but there was this very vibrant online conversation. Can you tell I work online? Very vibrant online conversation about busyness and kind of how whenever you ask anybody how they are, their first response is, "Oh, I'm so busy. I've been just crazy busy. Oh God." And the author's point was kind of that oftentimes is kind of a self-imposed misery that we put upon ourselves to make us feel important. And that kind of in an unrelated but I think important way is that oftentimes the people who work the most hours and kind of participate at the highest ends of the kind of socioeconomic scale actually consume the most. So the more you work, the more that you consume. But one of the things that I think we kind of have to think about is one of the ways that we could address this challenge of development, and it's an international conversation, but I'm going to talk about it just nationally, is to actually is to divorce healthcare from work. Because what that would allow us to do is it would allow people to do something like work 4 days a week. And when you're working 4 days a week, you have a lot more time to do things like volunteer in your community, tend to a garden, bicycle to work, and do all of those kinds of things. You also, if healthcare is divorced from work, it's a lot easier to take a risk and do something entrepreneurial. And to start the green business that's going to put a bunch of people to work. And that if we were to do something like work a 4-day work week, it would not only mean that all of the overworked, kind of harried, crazy, I'm so busy people would have a slower pace of life that would produce less consumption and less waste, but it also means that it would address the fact that there are considerable percentages of Americans who are unemployed. And so then you could have 2 employees who are working 4 days a week and getting everything done that needed to get done and getting home in time to have dinner with their family. I think that there are real needs for us to think about how we're going to address this consumption problem in ways like, I never would have been like, yeah, healthcare. That's the thing that we have to do. But I think that when you start looking at this larger system and start looking at where it is that we're bumping up against these problems, it becomes a lot easier to see solutions that weren't necessarily there before. And I would also say that in terms of kind of more international conversations, I think that it's going to really require that we address some of the challenges that we have with patent law, that we're going to have to kind of think about how not only to create kind of energy, create open source energy policies and development around some of the really exciting stuff that's happening around biomimicry or green chemistry, or the ways in which we're developing creative alternatives to our super toxic, wasteful systems now, so that we're sharing that in a way that we can all benefit from it.
Just to add to that.
Yes.
Pioneers is coming up. It's in San Rafael at the Civic Center in October.
It's awesome.
That's awesome. But, and just to speak once more to that point, is that we all agree that plastic bottles for water are
Bad news.
nonsensical. And yet, we now develop a new industry where we're making these metal bottles and put our tap water in to carry around with us.
Yes.
I mean, in other words, we're creating the wheel all over and over and over and over again without any success.
I mean, I certainly think that a reusable steel water bottle, vast improvement over plastic, vast improvement. But one of the things that would be really rad is, I don't know, a lot of water fountains. That, you know, if you look at cities that have water fountains, like there's actually a really great organization that is working specifically on bottled water issues, and they have a new app that they're trying to develop that helps you figure out where the water fountains are in your community, because people don't know. You know, like if science could only figure out how to make a water fountain not gross, like I think we would really advance a lot. Yeah.
I don't know, I think kind of what you're talking about, you know, with getting healthcare separated from employment, like things on a big scale like that, it's great, but it's also about bringing things back to their roots. Like somebody I know told me this thing called the shareable of the Mexican fisherman, where you got a Mexican fisherman who has a boat, goes out and fishes, at the end of the day they catch their fish, he divides it among his crew, pays them, goes home, eats the fish, makes love to his wife. And then an investment banker comes in and says, dude, you need to expand. And then he gives him a big loan, he buys a whole fleet of ships, and he's working longer hours, and he's trying to pay back the loan. Eventually, he can't pay it back, and then the bank seizes all his boats, and he's left with nothing. What does he do? Buys a boat, hires a crew, they go out and fish every day. At the end of the day, he divides the fish, and pays his workers, goes home, and makes love to his wife. And like, I'm fortunate enough to own a business here in town, and I did what I do now in the corporate world, and I was miserable doing it. And now I get to do it. It's a lot more pure. I enjoy doing it, and it's not wasteful. I get to have a decision in everything I make. I think when people realize that, hey, they don't have to go slave away for somebody else's dream, and they can work on their own, they start at that grassroots level in the community, and it's like buying local food and things like that. I think if we go back to the way we used to do things and incorporate it in a way that uses all of our technology and the things that we know, I think that can do a lot.
Oh, I would agree 100%. The story that he's talking about, Free Range Studios, who actually does all of our animation, did a really beautiful animated version of that story. They're a fantastic studio. They have offices here in Oakland and then also in DC. And I think that the question that you're kind of driving at, I think, is a critical one, and it's a question about happiness and the way in which that's related to consumption. And all too often, the kind of studies of like mental health are actually, historically, have been looking mostly at kind of disease and depression and mental dysfunction. And that only kind of recently is there more of an eye towards the science of happiness. So looking at what actually makes us happy. And lucky for us, the kind of emerging scientific data suggests that the things that truly make people happy are a strong sense of community, meaningful work, and participation in something greater than themselves. And isn't it lucky that I would argue that all of those things are what a career in a small local business, what a career doing community organizing, what a career doing working in elections, doing all of the kinds of things that we're going to need critically, provide. And I think that we can do a lot to amplify the volume, not only the importance of those alternative narratives because they are ecologically and economically important, but also because they make us happy. And I think that we don't have, I think that particularly in the environmental movement, we've gotten really kind of like eco-nagging, like you'll come to my party and I'm gonna shame you because you brought a plastic bottle to my party. And that actually we now kind of have an increasing amount of data and messaging experience on our side so that we get to say like, come over here, we're gonna have a great time, we're gonna be happier, and we're gonna save the planet. You get to do all of those things at once. And your story is is exactly in line with that. That kind of living at a scale that is better for the planet is also better for you. Yeah.
I disagree with this gentleman back here that did the first question, because I think you can have growth, paying attention to sustainability and also efficiency, both two important qualities.
Mm-hmm.
So, we need to improve the well-being of everybody, and I don't think that I think you can do that without destroying the planet.
Oh, I would certainly argue that there are some that you have to address that. That I think that part of what I didn't discuss earlier that I think is critical to the conversation is for most people, having more stuff doesn't make you happy. But that's after a particular threshold. And that if you have no shoes, and then you get a pair of shoes, having those shoes is gonna make you happier. If you don't have a roof over your head, and then you get a house, you are going to be happier. And there are communities across the globe that desperately need development and some of the kind of fundamental necessities that we have. But I don't think that it is, I think that there are challenges in many of our economic models in that we confuse growth with health. And kind of things that are, I think that there are a lot of things that contribute to the GDP that are actually quite damaging. So for example, it would be beneficial to the GDP if I got cancer, got a divorce, and crashed my car. The Valdez spill, all of those things actually contribute to the GDP. And so I think that suggests that there's something really flawed with a lot of the economic models that we're using, but I don't think that we can use that to say that other communities cannot develop. I think that we need to have that conversation and say that other communities need to develop, and we need to figure out a way that we can do that in a way that still addresses the ecological challenges that we face. And it's an exciting and challenging issue. You look frustrated.
No.
Okay.
You're right on the point. I think you're great.
Oh, thanks. Yes.
I think you're touching on a really sensitive point, and that is, how do we define growth? Well, growth is so built into our retirement system, our whole economic system. If we don't have growth, we don't get a good return on our investment, we're screwed, literally. So how do we sidestep that and we move from a growth, and this involves a bigger question of population growth, that we're going to have to face head on. I mean, there's just so much farmland that we can develop, and there's only so much food and all that sort of issue. So we're going to have to, and I've attended some sessions here talking about urban density, and we're just, it's all built in. We're going to have a 10% population growth, and then on top of that, another 10%, and that's what our economy is based on. So that's a sensitive issue. How do you see that playing out?
So I think that there are a number of models. I don't think that any of them are perfect, but there's the Gund Institute at the University of Vermont, I believe it is. There's also Earth Economics and the New Economics Foundation. And all of this to say that there are a number of conversations that are happening in economic, kind of people who understand these things far better than I, who are actually looking at alternative models in terms of how we can meet our needs economically, materially, et cetera, and also account for the fact that we're using 3 to 5 planets and that's fundamentally unsustainable. And I think that population is a really challenging issue, and if I'm going to be perfectly honest, I haven't figured out how to talk about it in a way that I'm satisfied with. Because I think that historically conversations about population have been very much about controlling people, and particularly people in the developing world in a way that I feel uncomfortable with. But that it is something that we're going to have to address because there is a carrying capacity of the Earth. And that those are, there are some recent statistics that suggest that there are 1 billion obese people living in the world. There are also 1 billion people who are chronically hungry. That to me is representative of a real challenge in the ways in which our growth is affecting other people's development. In ways that's not healthy for anybody. No one's winning in that situation. Yes.
So you remind me that first, I love your presentation.
Thank you.
And welcome to Mill Valley, because we have, as I look around the room, so many people who have been involved in so many things they're passionate about. This is a group of people that changes things. And that's what we do in Mill Valley. So I'm reminded, as you're talking about the population issue, that as a young mother, trying to decide what size family I was going to have, and then my children introduced me to your story of stuff from their preschool. I thought they ought to do a story of what happens when you have more kids and how that makes you use more stuff. Are you thinking of doing something?
So that's actually one of the movies that so there are a number of movies that we get a lot of requests for. That is one of the #1 movies that we get requests for. We are not, I think that we do not have plans to make that movie immediately, but I think that there is a real need to have that conversation. There's a really incredible photographer who did this series of portraits of families with all of their worldly possessions across the world. For those of you who haven't seen it, if you want to talk about someone's kind of the size of their family and how it contributes to their consumption patterns, it is crazy in the United States and in the majority of Western Europe and what have you. In other communities, it matters much less. I can't remember the name. Does anyone know the name of that photographer? I don't know. I'll look it up and I'll tell you.
Is it the book, The Material World?
I think it is. Yay, it's called The Material World. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
So over the last 5 years, there's been a movement in the sharing economy. So yeah, and I'm a huge fan of it myself, but sharing cars, Craigslist, Airbnb, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And do you think it's a very coastal movement right now? It's not so much in the middle of the United States, and I'm sure it's just relatively new, although probably 50 years ago it was standard. Now it's new. But I wanted to get your thoughts on where that's going, how that plays in here, and whether or not the middle of the United States will adopt that mentality too.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about sharing. Some people call it collaborative consumption, which is just a fancy word for sharing. But one of the reasons that I am particularly excited about that is not only because it requires that we use less stuff, but it also requires that we get to know each other. And that if you the data on the number of people who never have anyone over for dinner, who feel like they don't have anyone to talk to, is really quite shocking. And that there's a real increase in social isolation. And so for me, one of the really fabulous things about the sharing economy is not only are you meeting our material needs, but you're also meeting our social needs. And if you are developing those connections, it enables you to do other things together better. And so I think shareable.net is doing a really great job covering that work. And I'm a big fan of what they're doing. Are you familiar with them? You are gonna love them, Sharing Girl. And so I think shareable.net, also Nolo Press has a really excellent guide on sharing. And actually kind of how to think through if you want to share your car with a neighbor, if you want to do these kinds of things, what are the kind of contractual things that you would actually want to think through in terms of how do you facilitate that in our hyper-legalistic environment. And I would also say that in terms of kind of sharing as it relates to the coastal communities, I think a lot of that has to do with the density of our populations. And it's a lot easier to share things when you live really close to people. And so Neighbor Goods is an example of something that I'm really excited about. They've started it in San Francisco, but it's basically you can kind of write down all of the, kind of on this online database, all of these things that you have in your home that you would be willing to share with your neighbors. So whether it's like a bunt pan or a KitchenAid or a lawnmower or what have you, it goes into this registry, and then your neighbors can search on the registry and they can come and borrow it from you. It's called Neighbor Goods. And I'm super excited about that and what, kind of what that means. The peer-to-peer car sharing that's happening in the Bay Area is super cool. And I think that there's a real potential there, especially in the way that technology enables us to do those things more readily. But at the same time, I would also say that there are some really basic things, like, I don't know if you guys have these here, but in Berkeley, we have a bunch of tool lending libraries. So that for kind of like, how often do you need a machine that helps you break up cement? Not that much, but you can rent it from the library. And for me, as like a single girl living by myself in an apartment, I don't have a really robust tool department. But instead of buying it when I need it, I can just go to the library with my library card, and I can check out whatever drills or what have you that I need from the library, and then when I'm done, take them back. And so I think that there are a lot of ways that you can develop kind of that kind of sharing into existing cultural hubs that addresses more the challenge of space that I think is part and parcel of kind of what it's like in the middle of the country. And I think oftentimes that the middle of the country actually oftentimes trusts each other more. So they have less of a hurdle there and more of a hurdle in terms of infrastructure. And I think that we're going to get there. Yeah.
I recently learned about something called Marin Village and about a subgroup called Homestead Village. And on the website, I read that there's a Mill Valley Village forming. Is there anybody here from that?
Anybody here from Mill Valley Village?
So my understanding of this is really rudimentary, but it is a community organization that people join who want to be able to help each other out in a kind of organized way. And it may involve buying in, say, $500 for a year. And then if you are an older person who needs someone to come and clean up your gutters, you can get in touch with the group. I don't know how they connect to people, but
Super cool.
already exists. Do you know about this?
I don't know about this, but it sounds rad.
I wish somebody could say something more, who knows more about it right now.
I believe it's also labor that formed it.
Yes, that's right.
It's kind of like a time bank.
A barter bank.
Yeah. Sounds really cool. I wish I knew more about that. Yeah. Yeah, that's you.
I've been thinking a lot about the stuff.
Me too.
How does this all get started, this desire to have stuff? And of course it starts when we're kids and in the home, and we parents help by saying to a kid, if you're good, I'll get you A. And so it really begins in the home when the kids are little. And we grandparents, I'm not one, but still, I look around the room, we're mostly grandparents. It's something that we think about. How much are we all fostering this desire in the children to have stuff?
Oh, it's real.
It's terrible. It's really not good. And so I just wanted to say that as a thoughtful thing, and that other part of it is that we also have been brought up to think, all of us are cultures, that shopping will make us feel good. So if you're depressed, go shop. But in fact, what really does make us feel good is truly making something in the house, really using our hands, even if we're not artists or whatever. It does make us feel much better than going shopping. You come home with a beautiful new item and you look at it
Well, and I think that you can be the instigator of making that change in some of your relationships. And so I would strongly recommend the Center for the New American Dream has some really great resources on how to rethink gift giving, but also how to rethink your relationship with your children if you're worried that it's getting a little too materialistic in terms of how you are expressing your love and affection. Because we really do kind of conflate stuff with love and worth and value. We have some challenges that we have to face in terms of readdressing our relationship to food and stuff. But they've done some really great work on kind of helping people rethink and reframe how you approach those kind of relationships, whether it's just saying like, this year for Christmas, we're just doing experiential gifts. So whether that is, you know, like a trip together or a picnic, or saying that like, I will babysit your kids instead of, you know, taking you to go on a shopping trip or what have you, that there are kind of lots of ways that you can kind of address that that really make a difference and seem to catch on. It's called the Center for the New American Dream, and they have a number of resources, particularly around children. Yes?
Is there a 12-step these stuff,
So, I don't know. I know that there are a lot of really fabulous blogs that have covered these kinds of issues. So I know that there's like one woman who wore the same outfit for an entire year and kind of documented that. There's kind of this whole community of people online who are really trying to have as few things as possible. And, you know, they'll have like one spoon and one fork and one knife and 2 pairs of socks, and they, you know, or not at all. Have you read No Impact Man? It's getting really crazy in there. But that, you know, there are a number, if you're looking for resources, I can certainly point you in the right direction. I would say that the conversation that I would tap into most in that regards is the voluntary simplicity movement. And that there are kind of a number of people who have made the commitment and have recognized that their relationship with stuff is fundamentally unsustainable and unhappy making. And so have really tried to kind of shift their approach to their own stuff. But it's hard. Yeah. Yes?
So people say, well, why should you stop me from all of a sudden finding some invention that's doing well, that's selling well? At a certain point, you've reached a certain amount of wealth and collected a certain amount of property or items. At a certain point, the way the society tell you need to kind of give back or share it with those who kind of help you get there. For example, there was a letter today that really bothered me by a council member, Beverly. He said, what is it your business that this couple, living in a $12 million house, decided to destroy a $4.2 million house so they can have a better view of the bay in San Francisco? So the thing is, in some ways, an obligation that there are people going homeless or people who can't even afford to live, getting foreclosed on. And they get to destroy a $4.2 million home, and that's supposed to be okay with everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, so I think you kind of hit on a couple points there. One is that we fundamentally have to change how we define success and what that looks like in the United States. And we also have to, there are some real challenges in terms of the American ideology that have to do with kind of up by your own bootstraps, and it's my personal business and my decision to do what have you as long as you have the most money. Eric Liu is a personal hero of mine, and he just read this beautiful book called The Gardens of Democracy. But one of the things that he looks at in that is kind of his catchphrase is everybody does better when everybody does better. And that there's some real data that supports the hypothesis that we all do better when there is more equity. And that you can't have these super wealthy elite and have kind of this devastating poverty and have everything be okay. And so I think that there's some really exciting conversations that are happening around that make me really excited about where we're headed. Yes.
I moved to Mill Valley in 1969 from South Salida. And back then we had babysitting co-ops.
Hell yeah.
Cheese co-op. We had a swimming pool co-op. People got along better. We had free concerts downtown. I mean, you know, we've been there. we walked away.
And that's what I'm saying. I think we've forgotten a lot of the things that actually were really cool, that we were doing, that were working really well. And, you know, I'm a member of I volunteer at a free healthcare clinic in Berkeley, and it's a collectively run structure, which means that I get 15% off at all of the co-ops in the Bay Area. And it's one of those things that it takes a lot of work to set up, but I would argue that now with the internet, it's really a lot easier even. And those are the kinds of things that we need, not only because we need them, but also because they're really nice to have, and that they make things better. That we've kind of, you know, in talking about that consumer muscle versus that citizen muscle, a lot of the things that we used to rely on our community for, we now pay people to do for us, whether it's a ride to the airport, or a meal, or somebody watch your kids. Those are all things that we used to turn to our community for, and we need to start turning to our community again. Yeah?
I just have an advertisement for the Marin Garden Exchange, and it's every Saturday, 9:30 at Boyle Park. You bring whatever you want from your garden, herbs, flowers, seeds, actual fruit, vegetables, and we display it. You provide what you want, and you take what you want. There's no dollar amount put on anything. It is purely an exchange. If you want to bring 2 eggs and take, you know, everything that's there, you can. It's at Boyle Park every Saturday. I think we're on our 4th week, and it's at 9:30 in the morning.
Super cool. See, look at that.
And they're only like 8 or 10 people who show up. And I mean, we need more people for it. It's really fun. And you actually, if you have any questions about your garden, there are wonderful resources there to help you set up your beds, talk about pesticide-free planting, and you know, it's a wonderful sharing event.
Yay for sharing. I'm just going to take these last 2 questions, and then I'm going to wrap up. So yes, right there.
I was just, you know, I saw a one-man show a couple of years ago, and the guy was talking about going into some remote island, and I don't know what the context was, but he was saying, like, he had this statement that was like the elephant in the room. It was like, stuff is great. It's really fun. It's, you know, I love my stuff. And it was like the first honest statement about that I had heard, like, really publicly. It's like we've got this thing like, oh, stuff makes you unhappy. There's a lot of fun and pleasure that comes out of our stuff. And I don't think we're, as like progressives and environmentalists, totally honest about that. And there's a reason we don't want to give it up. Okay. And so, you know, does it lead to true inner happiness? And, you know, you can question it on a kind of deeper level, but there's a lot of pleasure that comes out of that stuff, and that's why we don't want to give it up. It's convenient.
It is a very complicated relationship.
I think until we
as an iPad owner, I can tell you, it's a very complicated relationship.
You know, and then it's like until we really get straight about that, I don't know how we're going to kind of even consider it, because that it just looks like total sacrifice. And, you know, very few people really want to give up any creature comforts. You know, and so it's like there's something to, I don't know quite what the answer is in terms of grappling with that, but something like I know internally I have to kind of come to grips with that.
It's going to require a little bit more of a radical honesty about how we actually feel and what we're not willing to negotiate on. And I think that Michael Maniates, who is a great kind of ally of the Story of Stuff project and a real kind of incredible thinker on a lot of these consumption issues, has a really interesting book called The Politics of Sacrifice that addresses some of those challenges. And I think that there are a lot of things that we invest in our things, and I understand and relate to the joy that can come from stuff. But I think that we have allowed that joy to obfuscate a lot of the tragedy and sorrow and kind of challenges that come along with that.
And part of it is we're not associated with the repercussions.
So we live in the United States and we don't produce very much here. So I may love my iPad, but the children in the Democratic Republic of the Congo who are mining the coltan that makes it web-enabled probably don't love my iPad that much. And I think that those are some challenges that we need to have, and it's harder to have those conversations in terms of a global conversation. But it's important.
And that's where the interconnectedness comes in.
Ding, ding, ding. But I think you bring up an excellent point. It is a hard conversation to have. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I'll stand up. I'm in the back. I just want to shout out to the library, and I want to shout out to the 6 days. George Carlin.
Oh, it is the best.
Yeah.
George Carlin's rap on stuff, hands down,
You got it.
my favorite.
You got it.
It's really good.
You could probably get it here at the library, anywhere. He did something back in the 60s about my stuff, your stuff. It's really mind-altering. It comes from George Carlin, and my God, he's the god of stuff. So rent it. It's wonderful. It's
You can get it on YouTube even.
Do they have it on YouTube?
It's on YouTube, and it is hysterical.
Yeah, George Carlin stuff. It's hysterical. I mean, it just makes you just laugh. And the other thing I want to say, how proud I am to be part of this wonderful institution that has this wonderful store downstairs that recycles these wonderful books that people go in and they donate and they buy, and it just keeps on recycling and recycling. You keep on saying, same book come back every other month, and it happens here locally. So you talked about how pride there is in the 60s and looking back. We are doing a good job. You know, we're talking about it. We're growing little tomatoes in our little pots. You know, we are working. You know, and that we're talking about it. And thank you for